Hello and welcome to this news live from Islamabad. I'm Bulletin and these are the headlines. In Myanmar, the ruling military has charged the international envoy of the country's ousted government with treason. Dr. Sasa has been accused of encouraging a civil disobedience campaign following the February 1st coup. Nearly 150 people have been killed during the anti-coup protests. The UN envoy says the Yemen conflict is deteriorating due to Houthis' offensive on Marib and cross-border attacks targeting Saudi Arabia. Addressing the Security Council, Martin Griffiths called for a probe into the killing of dozens of migrants during a fire at a Houthi-run detention center. Dozens were killed and over 170 injured in the blaze on the 7th of March. The OIC has condemned Sri Lanka's proposed ban on burqas and madrasas over security concerns. In a series of tweets, the organization said the move violates minorities' rights to practice their religion freely. It urged the Sri Lankan government to avoid taking any steps which negate pluralism. The executive director of the European Medicines Agency says the benefits of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine outweigh its risks. Emma Kirk was addressing a press conference following the suspension of the vaccine's rollout by several countries over blood clot concerns. She said the final decision would be made after a complete review on Thursday. Globally, the virus has infected more than 120 million people and claimed over 2.6 million lives, including 13,595 in Pakistan. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Myanmar, the ruling military has charged the international envoy of the country's ousted government with treason. Dr. Sasa has been accused of encouraging a civil disobedience campaign following the February 1st coup. He had also called for international sanctions on military leaders. Last month, the country's ambassador to the United Nations was removed after he denounced the coup. The military has intensified its crackdown on anti-coup demonstrations despite sanctions and international calls for restraint. According to the UN Human Rights Council, security forces have killed nearly 150 protesters so far. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged the international community to help end the repression by Myanmar's military. The UN envoy says the Yemen conflict is deteriorating due to the Houthis' offensive on Marib and cross-border attacks targeting Saudi Arabia. Addressing the Security Council, Martin Griffiths called for a probe into the killing of dozens of migrants during a fire at a Houthi-run detention center in Sana'a. Nearly 60 migrants were killed and over 170 injured in the blaze on the 7th of March. According to Human Rights Watch, Houthis fired 2 projectiles at the facility after gathering the migrants in the building. Meanwhile, UN Relief Chief Mark Lowcock called for accountability of those responsible for violations of humanitarian law in Yemen. A complete shutdown is being observed over extrajudicial killings by Indian forces in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Indian troops earlier killed 2 youth after blowing up their houses during a 3-day-long cordon and search operation. All shops and businesses are closed, while public transport is also suspended in the districts. Meanwhile, the occupying forces conducted more of its violent so-called cordon and search operations in Srinagar, Sopore and Budgam. In India, the farmers' protest along Delhi borders has entered its 111th day today. So far, more than 250 crores have died in the stir against Prime Minister Narendra Modi's contentious laws. The growers have vowed to accelerate the protests and refuse to budge until the centre repeals reforms that will jeopardize their living. The farm unions have announced a nationwide strike on March the 26th, which will mark the completion of 4 months of the protest. Several trade unions, transporter and retailers associations will participate in the strike. The OIC has condemned Sri Lanka's proposed ban on burqas and madrasas over security concerns. In a series of tweets, the organization said the move violates minorities' rights to practice their religion freely. It urged the Sri Lankan government to avoid taking any steps which negate pluralism. The decision was announced last week by the Security Minister of Sri Lanka, drawing criticism from regional allies and rights groups. And now the Foreign Ministry has described it as a mere proposal under discussion. The wearing of burqas was banned in 2019, soon after the Easter Sunday attacks on churches and hotels that killed more than 260 people. This ban was lifted earlier this year after criticism from the United States and international rights groups. Gunmen have killed 3 Afghan security personnel in an attack on the Pashdan Dam in western Herat province. A spokesperson for the National Water Affairs Regulation Authority said 4 others were wounded. Herat governor's spokesperson has blamed the Taliban for the attack. He said 5 fighters of the group were killed in retaliation. Meanwhile, 2 people were killed in an attack on a student bus of Baghlan University in the city of Pule Khumri. Police have blamed the Taliban, but they have denied the accusation. A U.S. watchdog on Afghanistan has warned that further aid cuts can imperil the war-torn country. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction says the slashes by the U.S. and other donors can cause the government to collapse. In an interview, John Sopko said any such move would return Afghanistan to chaos. He said 80% of Afghanistan's budget is funded by the U.S. and other international donors. Sopko said even the Taliban recognize they really need foreign support. He added the World Bank found if the peace pact is reached, Afghanistan will need $5.2 billion in aid through 2024. The U.S. says it will continue to work with allies towards the denuclearization of North Korea. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said this in a meeting with his Japanese counterpart Toshimitsu Motegi in Tokyo. A White House spokesperson Jen Psaki also said Washington has reached out to North Korea but has not received a response. Talking to reporters, Psaki said Pyongyang has rebuffed U.S. calls for dialogue. Meanwhile, North Korea threatened to scrap inter-Korean cooperation as it condemned the U.S.-South Korea military drills. The sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un warned Washington against causing a stink if it wants peace. She said they want the new U.S. administration, which is trying hard to give off powder smell in the land. China says cooperation between the United States and Japan must not harm third-party interests. This comes after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited Japan.
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said U.S. diplomats called China a threat while meeting with Japanese counterparts. At a press conference, Zhao said China believes the U.S.-Japan cooperation should benefit regional peace and stability. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned China against using coercion and aggression during his first visit to Japan. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is accompanying Blinken on the trip. Blinken and Austin held a 2+2 meeting with Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi and Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi in Tokyo. A joint statement said the ministers discussed Washington's unwavering commitment to defend Japan in its territorial dispute with China. In a joint press conference, Motegi said China-related issues took up the majority of his bilateral talks with Blinken. He said the meeting expressed strong opposition to Beijing's attempt to change the status quo in the East and South China Seas. Other issues, including COVID-19 vaccines, semiconductor supply chain security, the military coup in Myanmar, and North Korea's nuclear threat was also discussed during the meeting.
China has urged the West to stop interfering in the internal affairs of other countries under the pretext of human rights. Head of the Chinese mission to the United Nations office at Geneva, Chen Shu, was speaking at the 46th session of the UN Human Rights Council. Chen accused the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, and some EU members of abusing the UNHRC platform. He said they use the platform to spread false information and groundless accusations against China. The envoy reaffirmed Beijing's firm opposition to the propaganda, saying it always puts people first. He said China has made visible achievements in advancing the cause of human rights. The envoy urged the highlighted countries to stop infringing on the human rights of their people and other countries as well. At least 5 rockets have hit an Iraqi military base housing U.S. troops in north of Baghdad. The Iraqi military says 2 more rockets fell outside the Bulletin air base and caused damage to the civilian house. The military said the attack caused no casualties on the ground. No group has yet claimed the responsibility for the attack. Earlier this month, the U.S. said it will defend its interests at all costs after a rocket attack on Iraq and Al-Sada air base. At least 10 rockets were fired at the base in Amber province that left a U.S. contractor dead due to cardiac arrest. U.S. forces retaliated by carrying out airstrikes against facilities at a border control point in Syria used by pro-Iran militias. In Lebanon, angry protesters took to the streets once again against the worsening financial meltdown. The Lebanese pound hit a new low against the dollar, losing more than 90% of its value. The country's economic crisis is posing the biggest threat to its stability since the 1975 to 1990 civil war. The problems were compounded after a port explosion in August last year that killed 200 people and prompted the government to resign. Prime Minister Hassan Diab's cabinet has stayed on in a caretaker capacity until a new cabinet is formed, but Prime Minister-designate Saad al-Hariri is at loggerheads with President Michel Aoun. He has been unable to form a new government to carry out much-needed reforms to unlock international aid. Representatives of Greece and Turkey are meeting in Athens in a bid to settle a standoff over the eastern Mediterranean. Little has been released about the agenda of the talks, which took place behind closed doors. Tuesday's meeting follows the one in Istanbul in January. These were the first direct talks between the two sides on the dispute in nearly 5 years. The two sides have not reached common ground in 66 such meetings since the year 2000. The executive director of the European Medicines Agency says the benefits of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine outweigh its risks. Emer Kirk was addressing a press conference following the suspension of the vaccine's rollout by several countries over blood clot concerns. She said the final decision would be made after a complete review on Thursday. The meeting comes after Latvia and Slovenia joined over a dozen European countries that have suspended the use of AstraZeneca vaccine. In Europe, the virus has claimed more than 900,000 lives, with over 2.6 million globally. Coronavirus has infected more than 120 million people worldwide. In Pakistan, another 58 people have died from COVID-19 and over 2,500 tested positive for the virus overnight. The health ministry says the countrywide death toll is approaching 13,600. Pakistan's caseload has crossed 607,000, of which more than 571,000 people have recovered. The ministry says the number of active cases in the country has topped 23,000, and nearly 2,400 people are admitted to hospitals across the country. Meanwhile, the government has started walk-in COVID-19 vaccinations for citizens aged 70 and above. Pakistan's outgoing Air Chief Marshal Mujahid Anwar Khan has paid a farewell visit to the Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa. During the meeting at the General Headquarters, the Army Chief thanked the Chief of Air Staff for his services to the nation. He lauded his services during Operation Swift Retort and critical support rendered in the fight against terrorism. Later, the outgoing Air Chief paid a farewell visit to the Director General Inter-Services Intelligence, Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid. The Director General appreciated his contributions for enhancing professional capabilities of the Air Force. The Air Chief hailed ISI's performance in guarding national interests. Bahrain has lauded Pakistan Navy's role in maintaining peace and order in the Indian Ocean region. Bahrain's Naval Forces Commander, Commodore Muhammad Yusuf Al-Assam, shared these views while meeting Pakistan's Naval Chief. Pakistan's Naval Chief Muhammad Amjad Khan Niazi is on a visit to Bahrain to discuss regional security and ways to boost cooperation. Bahrain's naval head received Admiral Niazi on his arrival and presented the Guard of Honor. Niazi held separate meetings with the leaders of Bahrain's defense forces. Pakistan Navy's media wing says the two sides discussed matters related to maritime security and defense collaborations. Admiral Niazi underscored the Navy's initiative of regional maritime security patrols to ensure peace and order in the region. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. At the United Nations, Pakistan has proposed a global compact for women's empowerment plan to ensure their participation in decision-making. Envoy Munir Akram virtually addressed the 65th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women. The envoy proposed concrete measures to eliminate violence against women and girls. He said despite progress, women's voices continue to be silenced and their participation in public life obstructed. He called on the international community to ensure that women, who constitute half of the world's population, are never again left behind. Russia says it will block Twitter within a month if it fails to delete posts that contain information about suicide and child pornography. The warning was issued a week after Russia began slowing down its speed over the dispute. The country has already sued 5 social media platforms. Russia has increased pressure on Western giants, especially those hosting content supporting jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Thousands took to the streets of Bolivia in protest against the arrest of former President Janine Áñez. She has begun a 4-month jail term over her alleged role in a coup that led to the removal of Evo Morales from power in 2019. The protesters chanted slogans in favor of Áñez and called her a brave woman. Earlier, police took Áñez into custody from her home in Trinidad and transferred her to a women's prison in the capital, La Paz. Justice Minister Ivan Lima said he would seek a 30-year jail sentence if Áñez is convicted of fomenting a coup. Her energy and justice ministers also were ordered into custody. The 3 face charges of terrorism, sedition and conspiracy over the alleged coup. Even after 10 years since the crisis in Syria erupted, war refugees are forced to live in extremely tough and miserable conditions. The story of such a family in this report.
Habis al-Mahmoud and his family have been in a continuous struggle against hunger, diseases, cold and whatnot for the past several years. Mahmoud is a war refugee who lives in a scruffy tent with his wife and 5 children in a camp for the displaced persons in central Syria. But the living conditions over here are still better than the overcrowded Rukban camp where they previously lived.
In the Rukban camp, we did not have water to drink and could only drink the rainwater in the pit. I could see the worms squirming in the water.
Mahmoud and his family have been left exhausted by years of drifting around and greatly miss the happier, worry-free days before the Syrian crisis erupted.
Before the war, we used to have everything. Services such as heating and public medical care were all free.
According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Syria remains the world's largest refugee crisis. Since 2011, over 6.6 million Syrians have been forced to flee their homes, and another 6.7 million people remain displaced in the country.
Icelanders are yearning for some undisturbed shut-eye after a couple of jittery weeks, literally. Tremors from tens of thousands of earthquakes have rattled their sleep in an unprecedented seismic event, which might well end in a spectacular lava show. More in this report.
Located between the Eurasian and the North American tectonic plates, Iceland frequently experiences earthquakes. The source of the past week's earthquakes is a large body of molten rock known as magma, moving roughly 1 kilometer beneath the peninsula as it tries to push its way to the surface.
So the situation in Grindavik is quite uncomfortable right now. Everyone is sleep deprived because the earth is constantly moving all day, all night. Some earthquakes are bigger than others. Some are 3.1, some are 4.2. Today we had a big one, 5.4.
Authorities in Iceland warned of an imminent volcanic eruption on the peninsula in early March, but said they did not expect it to disturb international air traffic or damage critical infrastructure nearby.
So there are some concerns about infrastructure on the Reykjanes Peninsula and what would happen if we have an eruption. Of course, the international airport is very close, but since the eruption is likely going to be very quiet and not very explosive and no huge amounts of ash, so that should not be an effect on the airport, hopefully.
More than 40,000 earthquakes have occurred since the 24th of February, exceeding the total number of earthquakes registered on the peninsula last year.
A robot manufacturer in Russia has started research and development into making robots look more like their creators. Promobot aims to create a realistic appearance for humanoid robots using 3D modeling and hyper-realistic artificial skin. This report has more.
Robots will soon look like us thanks to the efforts of Fyodor Chergodov, a Russian sculptor, architect, designer and 3D modeler. Chergodov says the goal is to bring the aesthetics of sculpture and art into humanoid robots. He believes that progress in the fast-growing field of robotics requires a combination of art and technology. Currently, the lab is developing a prototype of a male humanoid robot, Alexei, and mass production is scheduled to start by the end of the year.
At the moment, we are focused on Alexei's elaboration. The technologies are all identical. If we make a high-quality eye, we can use it for all our other models. Therefore, now the most important thing is to bring those developments that we have to mass production. We plan to have mass production of these technologies by the end of the year, and we want to start producing the whole body, not only the head, but also to have a full torso and legs, and to make all of this movable.
Promobot supplies its robots to government offices and Russian universities. It has also signed new contracts with some U.S. universities. Service Promobots work in 40 countries around the world as administrators, promoters, consultants, guides, and concierge, replacing or supplementing human employees.
At the moment, we supply robots to the government centers in Moscow, various universities, our regular customers, and medical universities. There is also a large and promising market in the United States where universities are also mostly interested, and we already signed some contracts and so on.
In 2019, the Promobot V4 model robot became an employee of the American College of North Carolina. Developers at the company are currently working on Robo-C as well as developing service robots of Promobot V4 model.
Nominations for this year's Oscars have been announced in Los Angeles ahead of the virtual ceremony on 25th of April. Netflix's Hollywood drama Mank is leading the nominations with 10 nods, including the Best Picture. This report has more.
After many delays of this pandemic year, the Oscar nominations are finally upon us. Sacha Baron Cohen, Carey Mulligan, Olivia Colman, Daniel Kaluuya, and Sir Anthony Hopkins are among the British stars nominated. They're joined by the likes of Frances McDormand, Glenn Close, Viola Davis, and the late Chadwick Boseman for Best Actor. Other Best Picture nods went to dementia drama The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, and Korean language drama Minari. British Pakistani Riz Ahmed has become the first Muslim nominated for Best Actor in a leading role for Sound of Metal. South Korean actress Yoo Jung-yeon has become the first Korean actress to get an Oscar nod, while Chinese-born director Chloe Zhao nabbed one of the 5 Best Director nods for Nomadland. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences said a record 76 nominations went to women. The event will take place at Los Angeles Union Station and the Dolby Theater next month. The form of the ceremony has not yet been announced.
Another business updates, the EU is launching a legal action against the UK over the alleged violations of the Brexit deal's protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. In a letter to London, Brussels has given formal notice of its plans to kickstart an infringement procedure of fines being imposed by the EU's top court. The 27-nation bloc is objecting to UK's unilaterally extending a grace period beyond April the 1st, applying to trade concerning Ireland. Responding, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the extension was simply a technical decision aimed at being fair. Meanwhile, the US has urged Britain and the European Union to preserve the Good Friday Accord for peace in Northern Ireland. Talking to reporters, Jen Psaki said President Joe Biden has been unequivocal in his support for the Belfast Agreement. Wall Street stocks have opened higher as Federal Reserve officials kicked off their policy meeting. The Nasdaq Composite touched a 2-week peak as technology stocks extended a rebound. The shares of Apple and Alphabet surged 1.7%, while Amazon also gained 1%. But despite the recent records, concern in growing among the investors that interest rates may continue to climb. The S&P 500 index also traded marginally higher, while the DJI was lower. Meanwhile, the oil prices dropped amid rising stockpiles and COVID-19 demand concerns. In football, Barcelona beat Huesca 4-1 in the Spanish La Liga face-off. The win moves Barca back into the second place, 4 points behind leaders Atletico Madrid. Lionel Messi's brace, along with goals from Antoine Griezmann and Oscar Mingueza, led Barca to a comfortable win. The Argentine star also equals Xavi Hernandez's old record for most Barcelona appearances with his 767th game. Messi will break former Spain midfielder Xavi's record on Sunday if he plays against Real Sociedad. In the English Premier League, Liverpool beat Wolverhampton Wanderers 1-0 to rekindle their hopes for a top 4 finish in the league. The Reds have ascended to 6th place with 46 points, 2 behind 5th placed West Ham. Diogo Jota netted the winner for the Reds, drilling a low first-time shot under Patricios to settle a tight contest. However, the match was marred by an injury fright to the home team's goalkeeper, Rui Patricio. Play was held off for 10 minutes after Patricio collided with teammate Conor Cody in the 89th minute. The club's medical staff says the goalkeeper escaped what initially looked like a serious head injury. The defeat leaves the Wolves in the 13th place on 35 points from 29 matches. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.